Hi, my name is Ridley. Welcome back to my kitchen, and this is my kitchen, how I found it. We're going to be continuing our journey of Italy today with a little sweet treat from Sicily. Specifically, we're going to be taking a look at cannolis. The history of the cannoli is kind of cool. I found two main stories that were really battling back and forth between how frequently they were showing up. One is that the cannoli was available between 800 and 1000 AD. Yeah. And essentially, they were used by the concubines of princes in an attempt to woo them or bring attention to themselves. The other story that I saw is that they were used during the Carnival and were possibly a fertility symbol, but not necessarily. But in any case, the name actually comes from caneolas, which is a Latin word that is for reed. And so it is believed that the artisans on the street would actually use reeds and roll the dough around them and cook them, and that created that sort of tube-like shape. They would then fill that with a mixture of ricotta cheese and honey or some kind of sweetened cream, and that ended up slowly transforming into the cannoli that we know today. So for what we're going to be doing today, I did actually grab a little bit more of the 00 sugar, or the 00 flour. You want something really finely ground for this one. We're pairing this off with 1 egg. We also have a little bit of powdered sugar, or confectioner sugar. Now for this one, you can also use super fine sugar if you want, because the powdered sugar has a little bit of cornstarch added as an anti-caking agent. You don't have to though, and in fact for the icing later, or the ricotta filling, it is recommended you use confectioner sugar, so I just use it in the dough as well. I also have a little bit of cocoa powder. We have some marsala. Now this is a sweetened fortified wine. It's kind of got a fruity tone to it, but then a little bit of a caramely undertone as well. You can use port if you can't find marsala, but marsala is going to be the traditional one you want to use. And then I have a little bit of some homemade vanilla extract. So this is just vanilla pods that have been soaking in an alcohol solution. In this case, I used bourbon because I like a little bit of that vanilla flavor from the bourbon as well. And then a little bit of fat. In this case, I'm going to be using tallow. Traditionally, you would use lard or even butter, but I have some tallow available, and so I wanted to make sure that I'm using what I have on hand. So that's going to be the dough. We're going to make that, and once the dough is all done, you actually wrap that in these really cute little cannoli makers instead of reeds nowadays. So these you're able to use in the oil, and it's not going to damage them at all. They are not connected, so they have a little bit of spring to them, which will allow you to pull them out once you've got a fully formed cannoli on there. And then for the cannoli filling, you want to use ricotta cheese. And a big part of cannolis is you do not want them to get soggy. So what you'll find is that we make the cannoli tubes, and then you only fill them with this filling right at the very end to prevent sogginess. And in addition to that, you actually want to try and drain your ricotta over a bowl for a couple of hours to get as much moisture out of it as you possibly can. I'm using sort of a cheesecloth here. You can use a coffee filter, just anything to make sure that none of those fine particulates get through and that you're maintaining the cheese up top. Now, traditionally speaking, you're going to want to use sheep's milk ricotta. It's very specific in this regard, and it also has a different texture to the cow milk ricotta. I was not able to locate that, and so I am using cow's milk ricotta, but just know, if you want to keep it super traditional, you're going to want to go with sheep's milk. Now, we're going to be taking that ricotta, mixing it with a little bit of the confectioner sugar like we discussed earlier, so this is going to give that really nice bit of sweetness to it. We're going to have a little bit of salt in there. This is absolutely not the salt we're going to be using, only a small portion of this, but I like to have things just available in small portions and easy to use when I'm mixing and getting everything together. Inside the filling, we're going to be putting some chocolate chips. Now you can use mini chocolate chips. These ones are a little big, so I'm going to be breaking them up into smaller pieces just to make it easier to disperse throughout the filling. And we're also going to be doing some candied oranges. So that's a very traditional filling, is candied orange with a little bit of chocolate, and then you top it with some pistachios. Pistachios coming up. And then also, just for a tiny bit of spice, we're going to have a few pinches of cinnamon in with the mixture. But once we're done with frying together some of these tubes, we're going to mix up and chill some of the ricotta cheese mixture. And then we're going to fry everything together, fill them at the very, very end, so that we end up with perfectly crispy, creamy, and sweet and savory cannolis. So let's get started. So when it comes to the filling here, we need to break these up a little bit more, like we were saying, just so we don't have such large pieces. And same thing for the pistachios. I don't want whole pistachios as my main texture on top. I want to make sure that it's more of a crumble so that you get a little bit of good texture and a spread of the flavor. An easy way to do this is, of course, you can do it by knife, but there is nothing wrong with getting a little aggression out. So I'm going to put them in a bag, and as Isma said, I'm going to smash it with a hammer. Crumble those up a little bit. I want a little bit more. That's better. Much better. All right. So now we've got some more of crumbles. There are still some larger pieces in there, but I am okay with that. By and large, it has crumbled up quite a bit. And we're getting more of these smaller pieces, which are kind of what I was looking for. Now, we get to continue the fun with pistachios. And same thing here, we've got a bit of a variety of the sizes, but most of them have been broken down pretty well, and I'll have no problem finding some good sprinkleable pits for it. So that is the entirety of prep of the dry ingredients. I guess technically this one's kind of moist. It's wet on the inside. So for the oranges, in order to get candied oranges, it's very simple. Just take some oranges, we're gonna slice them thin, going this way along it so that we have this nice bisection of it. You're going to discard these outer portions that are going to be all pith, all the white section there. And just going to keep these really nice orange cross sections. And then we're going to boil these in sugar for quite a while, let them dry out, and then the entire thing becomes candied orange that you can chop up and put into your filling. All right, let me grab a few more oranges together, and we have all of our filling ingredients done now too. All right, so it's time to put the dough together. So we're gonna start by just mixing together the dry ingredients and sifting those. So I've got our 00 flour, I have the 20 grams of powdered sugar. For the flour, it was about 2 cups or 250 grams. And then for the cocoa powder, I found a lot of different variations of this one. Most of them said between 1 and 2 tablespoons, so I am in that range there. I'm probably going to not use all of it because I don't necessarily want this to be super chocolatey, and I don't want to overwhelm it. So I'm going right in the 1 to 1.5 tablespoons area. We're going to sift this down just to make sure that we don't have any clumping left in here and that everything is nicely able to be mixed. All right, perfect. Then we are going to add in the fat, the egg, and the masala wine. Give it a nice mix together. And don't lose any eggshells in there, unless you want a fun surprise later. And everything that I'm seeing for this just says to get your hands in there and get a good mix in. So I'm going to be treating this very similar to, say, a pasta dough. I do have the fat that I warmed up a little bit. I would say you probably want room temperature fat. I have mine still a little cool in the center, so maybe give it a little bit more time to make sure that it's easy to break up in here. We're going to give this a good mix. Once a shaggy dough has formed, I'm going to turn it out and I'm going to knead it for about 15 to 20 minutes until a really smooth dough forms. And then once that dough is formed, we're going to wrap it up in some saran wrap and just let it rest for, I would say, anywhere from 15 minutes to about 2 hours at room temperature. So let me get this nice and mixed in. I'm going to add the vanilla extract right at the very end there and get kneading. So I'll see you in 15, 20 minutes. So after you have completed the kneading for about 15 minutes, you will see that it has completely changed in texture. So now it's this really smooth, almost like a, almost like sculpture clay or something like that, but it's got this really nice elastic feel to it. So once you've got to this step here, I'm kind of assuming, I haven't done this dough before, but this feels really good and it feels right, so I'm going to stick with it. We're going to take that, we're going to wrap that up in some saran wrap here to make sure that it maintains all of its moisture, and then we're going to let that sit, like I was saying, for about 15 minutes at least, but up to 2 hours. While we're letting this sit is when we're going to make the cream filling, get that chilling in the fridge, come back to the dough, and it should be ready for us to form the cannolis. While we've got that dough resting, it's now time for us to make that filling mix. So we're going to take the ricotta cheese that we have been draining for the last couple of hours over this bowl here. You're going to want to leave as much moisture behind as you can and just transfer it into another bowl for us to mix up. Now, first step on this one is just going to be whipping this up. If you have a stand mixer, you can do it really quickly with that, but you can, of course, just use a regular whisk. And this is just to kind of break it up and make sure that you've added a little bit of air into the mixture, and it's not going to be quite as dense. It's going to be a little bit fluffier, and then we're going to start adding and folding in the ingredients from there to try and maintain that kind of aerated mixture. You don't want to deflate it by adding too much of the by adding too much force when you're mixing in the ingredients. All right, so you've got this nice or creamy texture in there. We are going to add 300 grams of confectioner's sugar, which is probably just about 2 cups. With confectioner's sugar especially, because it's really, really fluffy and can get into different levels of compaction, I do recommend doing a weight measurement on that one. Similar with flour or anything like that where there is a high degree of compression available, you want to try and not do too much. Now I'm going to do kind of a gentle mix together here, and then I'm going to switch over to a silicone utensil, more of like a spatula, just so I can scrape the sides down and do a fold in with the heavier ingredients for the chocolate chips. Then we're going to get this cooling a little bit. We're going to get the candied oranges going, and then at the very end we can mix some candied oranges into this as well, or use them as a topping at the end. Either one will work. All right, scrape down the sides a little bit. Make sure you've got everything there from all of the edges. And then this is where we're going to start to fold instead of doing a really heavy whisking and mixing on things, because we want to try and maintain as much of this creamy, airy texture as we can without deflating it much. Similar thing happens if you're ever doing a really fluffy cake, like an angel food cake, and you're doing mix-ins to it. Anything you can do to try and maintain the air that's inside the batter already will go a long way to keeping that fluffiness towards the end. We've got a good mix of all of that. I'm going to do just a little bit of salt to offset everything. Now it says to do about a ½ teaspoon. I'm measuring with my heart. Okay, so we've got this nice and mixed together. I'm going to put this in the fridge to get this chilling, because we want it to be nice and cool when we actually pipe it into the finished cannolis. And then once we have completed the candied oranges, I'm going to take a section of this aside, mix those candied orange bits in as well, so we can try a little bit of just the regular chocolate and a little bit with the candied orange, and maybe do a little side-by-side comparison. It's important to have more than one flavor when you're trying new things. All right, so I'm going to cover this up with saran wrap as well, into the fridge, and then we're going to move on with making those candied oranges. The candied oranges are going to be a really, really simple thing to put together. So all you need to do is take an equal amounts of sugar and water. In this case, I've got 3 cups of sugar. I'm going to put in 3 cups of water. We're just going to bring this up to heat on the stove and make sure that all of the sugar is completely dissolved into the water mixture. And then from that point, we're just going to add the sugar or the orange slices in and cook them for about 45 minutes to an hour and really get that sugar into the oranges and candy them. And that's as easy it is for candying. So we're going to first get this up to temperature, dissolve all of the sugar in there, add the oranges, and then get simmering. We have completely dissolved all of the sugar. And so now we've got this really nice super saturated sugar solution here. And we're just going to add the orange slices. You want to try and get them kind of in an even line. You don't want to overcrowd as much as you can. I'm using this really nice wide pan to give me a lot of extra room for that. I'm going to try and get as many of them in as I can in here, but don't go too crazy. And then, after we've got these simmering, we're just going to get the temperature to a point where we can maintain that simmer. And we are going to let these cook for about 45 minutes to an hour in the sugar syrup solution. What you're looking for is this white part of the orange, which we'll be able to really get a good view of once we've got a comparison with the new versus the cooked. But this white part here is going to be translucent, and it's going to completely fill with that sugar, and it's actually going to make the entire orange edible. So that's why it's candied orange, and instead of candied orange peel or everything, it's the whole thing we're candying. All right, so these have been simmering for just about an hour now. And if you want to take a look here, you can see that this one is a fresh slice, and it's got this really nice, vibrant, white, opaque rind. But after these have been cooking, it's really penetrated into the orange, and so you've got this almost transparent color to it, that it's fully gone into the rind. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to pull these out and just put them on a wire rack over a foil line sheet here. This is just because it's going to drip down and be an absolute mess to clean up if it goes directly onto the sheet. It's going to harden because we're going to let these cool here. So you're going to want to prep that space, otherwise you're going to have a headache later on. Now, after we've got these on the tray, you can let them out at room temperature to just sit for about 24 to 48 hours. In this case, I'm going to speed that up just a little bit by putting them in the oven at a very low temperature until they're kind of nice and dried and tacky. Now, with the syrup that's left in here, because it's essentially been infusing into those oranges, it's going to have an orange flavor to it, and it's already the recipe that I would use very similar to a simple syrup. So I'm just going to pour this out into a container to reserve later for use as an orange-infused simple syrup, and clean this pot up because we're going to use the same one for frying our cannolis. Time to shape the dough into some cannolis. So we're going to prepare a little surface with some flour. And then just so that we don't dry it out, we're going to split the dough into a couple of sections so that we can work with those individually before we actually let any of it dry out. So I'm going to take our dough that has been resting now for, I would say, a little over an hour, because it was while we were cooking our oranges over there. I'm going to divide it in half, and right away, half of it's going to go back in here for another batch. Then we're going to take this here, and we want to roll it out nice and thin. The goal that I've heard in a few different videos is about 1/16 of an inch. I don't know how to measure that, so I'm just going to go for very thin and uniformly thin across. Now, once we get this into position, we're going to actually be using a circular object. I'm actually going to be using a mixing glass from my bar, but we're going to be using that to cut out the shapes for the cannolis. And so kind of bear that in mind, that you're going to be using this almost like a cookie cutter template to cut the shapes out. So give yourself a little bit of levity. It doesn't need to be a specific dimension this way or anything like that, as long as you feel like you can get some good shapes cut out of it. And then if you want to cut, this will probably take me a bit to get it all flattened out. So I've rolled this out about as thin as I think I can realistically on here. I mean, maybe thinner, I don't know. But it feels 1/16-ish of an inch. So I'm just going to be using this shaker glass right here. It is just about 3 3/4 inches wide. I've seen measurements varying anywhere from 3.5 to 4.5 inches, so you can get a little bit bigger than this, you can get a little bit smaller than this by a tiny bit, but this is kind of in the middle, and I'm hoping it'll work pretty well. Now, I'm going to get some of these weird corner pieces first, because they've got those kind of indents in them. And then from there, it's just fill out as best as you can, and you end left with these cute little circles, which we're then going to wrap around the cannoli molds before we slide them into the hot oil. So give me a second to get these all cut out. Now, once you're done with a full set, you're definitely not going to be using all of the dough. So you're going to have some left over right here. Now, all of this, you can kind of dust any of the excess flour that's on there off, put it all together, let it rest for another 10 minutes or so, and then put it back on the mat, roll it flat out again, and get as many circles as you can. Rinse and repeat through the whole batch. So give me a few minutes while I cut out a whole bunch of circles, and then we'll move on to forming some cannolis. We've already pre-cut all of our cannoli shells for this first batch here. Got them under some plastic wrap off to the side just to keep them nice and moist. So I'm going to take them one at a time. And well, actually, first things first is we want to grease down the outside of the cannoli molds just to make sure that they don't stick. And a little help against keeping them locked on there after we pull them out of the oil. Now, if you don't have any Pam, don't worry. What you can do is, in Binging with Babish, he just threw them on a tray like this or in a bowl. You can put some oil in there, mix it around real quick. Just make sure that you get a good coating on the outside to help prevent sticking. So then, we are going to take it, just put it right on here, put it up on one side, and then I've got a little bit of some egg right here. This is just a well-beaten egg. I've seen a lot of places where it will say to use an egg white specifically. I've never had any issue in this kind of situation with using the whole egg, so I don't want to throw the yolk away. I just whisked it all together, and we have our first little cannoli. I would say for this type of mold, if I were to do this again, I would go for something that was maybe 4 or 4.5 inches as far as the diameter. I have a little bit of overlap, but I would like a little bit more if I had a chance next time. So we're going to do that with a few more of these, and then we are going to move on to the oil. We have formed ourselves our first batch of cannolis. So we've greased all the forms, put everything around, and sealed with a little bit of the egg wash mixture there. Now, we want it at about 350 degrees Fahrenheit or about 180 degrees Celsius. So we are at 349 right now. I think that's good for a first go. I turn it up just a bit because as we add this first batch, it's going to drop the temperature a touch. We want to keep an eye on this and make sure it doesn't go too high or too low. We don't want to over crisp them at first, and we also don't want to make sure they're undone. When we put them in, it should only be for a couple of minutes, so this should be a quick cook. Whew. They are definitely puffing up a lot. I don't think there was enough overlap to create a good enough seal. I'm going to pull this one off for now. All right, so we have a couple of these that are detached and are floating free. I'm just trying to flip them to get them crispy. The best we're going to do with this is make sort of a cannoli-themed taco. Or tostado for this one. It's flattened out enough. The other ones are holding out pretty well on their molds, but they've definitely puffed up more than I expected, so we're going to see what we can do with these. I might have to flatten out the next batch even more. There we go. Some of them know how to wait until it's time. Right. You know what? Definitely not perfect, but for a first try, I'm not super disappointed. All right, we're going to let these cool completely because, of course, we're going to be putting a cool ricotta cheese cream mixture into it. While those are cooling, I'm going to lay out the next batches, get them fried up, and we'll meet back when it's time to actually fill in the shells, at which point we have cannolis. Take two. So, what we have done is I rolled them out thinner for the second batch, and as you can see, I also took a larger circle, so we're filling a lot more of the cannoli mold than we were before. I think these are a lot healthier, happier looking cannolis. They're like free-range cannolis there. So, we are just waiting for this to get back up to temperature. Once again, we want to keep it at about 350 degrees through the whole fry. We're just a bit shy right now at about 320, so we're giving it a couple more seconds, but then we are going to hope that the second attempt is not going to be a disaster. We are just over temp now, so it'll cool down with the addition of all of these cannolis. So I'm not going to overcrowd the pan. Let me seal these back off. Well, cover them back up for a second while we're cooking these ones. Alright. And it looks like the additional overlap is helping a lot with making sure that they stay wrapped around the form. So that is a good sign already. Although I have a strange feeling yep, turning them is being just as difficult, but that's okay. Already I'm feeling better about this batch. And immediately this has been a much easier process. They stayed on throughout the entire thing, and that actually made it a lot easier for me to get it out because it's easier to grip the cannoli shell than it is to grip an oiled up piece of metal. Who'd have thought, eh? We have had our candied oranges in here dehydrating while we've been taking care of the rest of the cannolis. Optimally, I would want to probably, like I said, leave these out 24 to 48 hours at room temperature to let them do a slow dry. If you're putting them in a dehydrator, it's probably going to be closer to 6 to 10 hours. The lowest my oven goes is 175 degrees, and so I have it kind of on a speed dry here. They're going to be nice and dry on the top, but they're going to be a little tacky on the bottom still, so these aren't quite ready to be stored away. But they are pretty good for me to chop up and get ready to go into our filling here. So I'm going to take a few of these out, I'm going to chop them up, put them inside a ricotta filling to go into the cannolis, and then the rest of them I'm just going to set off to the side so that they can fully dry, and I'll have some extra little snacks of candied oranges. You can oftentimes find candied orange peels available in grocery stores, so if you don't want to do this at home, it's absolutely a step that you can skip. But it's also a very easy thing to do, and it allows you to kind of pick and choose the oranges that you like. So I found a really nice batch of really sweet, really juicy mandarin oranges, and the flavor translated deliciously into this, and I got some orange simple syrup on the side. All right. So we have our diced up candied oranges here. I've let them cool just a little bit so they're not too hot to touch. I'm going to be adding these directly into our cooled ricotta. And again, that kind of making sure it cools a little bit if you're going to be doing this fast drying method is important, because we want to make sure that this stays as a cool mixture and you don't want something too hot in there interacting with the dairy. Once again, we're going to do a nice fold in of these ingredients here. And something that I forgot to add earlier, but is absolutely no issue to add now, is going to be just a little pinch of cinnamon. This is totally optional, but I do love a little bit of spice, especially in my desserts. So I think that this is going to go really well with the orange flavor and the chocolate. For the chocolate, I actually selected, and this is absolutely not traditional, milk chocolate, but I know the audience I'm cooking for, and they're going to appreciate that more than the dark chocolate, which is what you probably should be using if you want to go with strict tradition. All right, so once we have this nicely mixed and incorporated, we have the candied oranges mixed in there as well. We're going to put this into a piping bag, and easiest way I've seen to do that is you just fold it over a cup like this. As far as piping bags go, it's just a little triangular piece of plastic. You can get reusable ones, and I've had reusable ones before. Unfortunately, it got thrown away because people didn't realize it was reusable. If you don't have one of these, you can also just use a Ziploc bag, push everything into a corner, and snip off the corner. So don't worry about having the specific piece of equipment. You can make do with Ziploc bags. All right, so we're going to get this into our piping bag in here. And this is just going to be the first batch. Once again, we're kind of figuring this out as we go, but this will give us our piping bag full of the filling. And then all we need to do is pipe that directly into our cannoli shells from both sides, and then add our toppings. So let me get a little snip on this one, and we'll do a test and see how we're doing. So this one right here. Whew. All right, give me 1 second. I'm so close, but a couple of these chocolate chunks are just too small for this tip. So I am going to add a tiny bit more. In the most professional way possible. Pipe this in, pipe that side, and we have a cannoli. Now, you're supposed to be piping these in immediately before you serve them, because you do not want the shell to be soggy. So the whole point of this is that you want to have the really crispy shell on the outside with the really creamy, decadent, delicious, creamy filling to counterbalance it. And if you have a pretty piping bag tip, you can, of course, use those as well. I'm just using a bag with a hole cut in it. All right, so let's just get a few of these cuties together. So we've got a few of these. I am going to just put a little dusting of powdered sugar over the top. Then we've got those fine little pieces. Ooh. From the pistachio that we can put on a couple of these. So we'll have a couple pistachio ones to try. We can try a couple without. All right, time to try everything. I'm going to be joined once again by the fabulous, spectacular Bruce. Now, something that wasn't quite adding up while I was rolling everything out and frying everything is they wasn't quite looking like what I expected given the videos and the recipes that I'd looked up prior to try and kind of prepare me for this. So I went back to check my math, and the reason things weren't adding up is because I changed measurements. So this is supposed to have cocoa powder in it, but it's supposed to have between 1 and 2 teaspoons, and we have between 1 and 2 tablespoons, which means that we're somewhere between 2 and 5 times the amount of cocoa that we're supposed to have in here.
It's quite the discrepancy.
Everything else about it, I swear, everything else I did like I
By the book.
intended. So what we have made here is chocolate cannolis. Accidentally. I'm excited to try them, but I just wanted to give you a heads up that they might be a little cocoa-y.
It's okay. That's okay. I can forgive you.
Okay. I'm glad, because there's no going back. What we have here is I set up one of them with the pistachios, and then the other one is going to be with additional candied orange. What do we want to try first?
I think I'm going to like the candied orange more, so let's start with the pistachio.
Okay, pistachio first.
All right.
So, first things first, it's an incredibly crunchy shell. I was actually struggling a little bit to fill these without breaking them.
All right, so let's try these.
Yes.
There we go.
Very crunchy shell.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see why they say to only fill it up right before. Because it's also very thin, and I could see this absorbing and getting really soggy really fast.
You know, it's also thicker than cannolis I'm used to. Which is not a bad thing. It's just different.
Mm-hmm. Now, these are from the second batch. So these ones are the thinner ones that I put out. So I imagine the first batch are going to be even more so. Flavor-wise, the filling is delicious.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a little bit of sweetness to it. In some recipes I saw, instead of powdered sugar, you can use honey, and I could see that being exceptional in this as well.
Yeah. Yeah, this is amazing.
I definitely get a Cocoa Pebbles kind of aftertaste to it, which is definitely the extra cocoa powder. I'm fine with that, but I get it a little bit from the pastry.
I'm also still tasting the candied orange in this, too.
And it is in the filling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested. What I'm not getting a lot of is the pistachio. It's almost like it kind of just...
Texture, really.
Yeah. But I am interested to see how the orange is when there is no pistachio, because this will have no pistachio in it.
An extra orange.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was great. You ready?
I was born ready. All right. Candied orange. The biggest change is the texture. And I think that part of it is because these weren't dehydrated fully the normal way. So that little tacky bit on the backside translates to a chewiness.
I was about to say, these are actually chewier than the other ones, and it's definitely because of the extra orange as kind of a garnish.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's good, but definitely the flavor isn't influenced as much as the texture is. But the chocolate, tiny bit of cinnamon.
Barely noticeable, really.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of the orange. It is a wonderful flavor mix.
I think all in all, these are pretty decent cannolis.
Mm-hmm.
Chocolate cannolis.
Right. I think I've had better, honestly. And definitely I see the elements of it that just require skill and really understanding every step of it, because I had no idea what happened when I first put in that first batch. And everything was ballooning up out of control.
I think the filling, though, I mean, is the obvious selling point here, because it was phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've ever had cannoli with the orange, candied orange inside before. So that was a pleasant surprise, because that changed everything.
A lot of them I've seen dipped in chocolate. I think that would be great, but would be too much on a chocolate cannoli.
On this one in particular, maybe a little much.
Maybe too much. And then also, definitely, I'm more used to like the light golden brown color and everything. Obviously influenced by additional cocoa powder.
Right. Extra chocolate.
Flavor-wise, delicious. I would be very interested to know the difference to the filling with the correct sheep's milk ricotta cheese.
Right, because can't find it here.
And I'm sure if I go to a specific retailers, I'm sure I can find it. But cow's milk is so much more prevalent in this market. It was just, this is probably what I would go for on a given day, and I'm not disappointed.
Not at all. It was fabulous.
All right. Well, this is our last stop in Italy, so our next stop is going to be another country. So join us next week to see where we'll be spending next month and what our first dish there is going to be. Looking forward to it.